Hello everyone, this is Professor Tychek, and we are going to go through the Ninja Sword Forecast Fun file. This is a classical demand forecasting data set in that we're going to predict 3 different products. We're going to use 4 different forecasting techniques and evaluate which one is the best one for each product. What you will find in this data set is that each sword may have a different forecasting technique that is better than the other. So it's not going to be all exponential smoothing, all moving average, etc. There will be some differences. And we'll look at them. You'll also be required to calculate the coefficient of determination, which is standard deviation divided by the mean, and that'll come out as a percentage. And there is, generally speaking, a correlation between the error in a forecast and the coefficient of determination. So here's our data set. We've got red, blue, and black swords. We've got the years 2000 and 2001 by month. We've got some descriptions that give you an idea of what we want to do in this file, but ultimately you're going to want to go to Blackboard and review the questions as well. That's going to be very important because you could end up doing a lot of work and none of it counts on Blackboard. Now I would also say, hey, if you do a lot of work, have fun with this file, and you're learning at the same time, what's the problem? But keep in mind that if you're taking this as the class requirement, there are questions that you have to complete as well. Okay. So you have to use the naive method, the cumulative, 3K moving, and exponential smoothing with a damping factor of 0.2. Okay? So do not do a 0.3 or 0.4 or anything like that. Do not do a 5K moving average. Do exactly as prescribed. Excuse me. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a tab for the red sword, for the blue, and for the black. Okay. Excuse me. I'm going to take all of this information for each sword and paste it over. Okay. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to hit Control and D and go down there, copy all that over, and do the same thing for the black sword. Okay, so now we've got the different demand for each, and we're going to play in there, and then we're going to come back to this when we're done. We're going to put some stuff down here when we're done. Okay, so what do we have to do? Well, we have to do the naive method. We have to do the 3K moving average. We have to do the cumulative average. And we have to do the exponential smoothing. Exponential smoothing 0.2. And I know I spelled that wrong. Exponential. Okay. So that's how that all works. What we're going to do now is we're going to do one of these, and then it's going to make sense. It's going to be something really cool happens. So first of all, for the naive, we cannot do the forecast. Moving average, we cannot do the forecast for the first 3. Cumulative, we cannot do the moving average. Exponential, we can't do the moving average. And let's get started. So naive method, simplest one to do. Drag down, moving average. Next one. Grab the first 3 here. Be very careful that you're not grabbing like a forecast column. Okay. Cumulative, again, is the average, and it grows. So we're going to put an absolute there, drag down, and now not do an absolute, but we're going to fix this up a little bit so that we don't have absolute here. Why? Because you had asked in class, a couple of you, if there's a faster way to do this. And yes, the answer is this. put an absolute cell reference in your originating range, and don't put one in the second one. When you drag down, the formula will grow automatically. So you can see here it's just growing automatically, how it didn't take the November one, but it took through October and such. Okay, very simple. Next one, exponential smoothing. Okay, remember it is 0.2 times the previous actual plus 1 minus the 0.2 times the previous forecast. Now, because we don't have a previous forecast, we plug this value. Okay, just as a reminder, we plug this value with the 129. This is literally called a plugged value. Okay, so that's a vocab word from class. Okay, now let's do the exponential smoothing again. Now it's 0.2 times the previous actual, which in this case is now the 90, plus 1 minus the 0.2 times the previous forecast, which is that 129. Okay. If we do everything right, sometimes we move real fast and we don't, we'll be able to drag down here. Okay. So again, 0.2 times the previous actual, which is the quantity sold, plus 1 minus 0.2, which gives us our 0.8 times G4. So in a way, we are taking 20% of the quantity sold and 80% of the previous forecast. What that means is we have faith in our forecast because we're weighting it so heavily, 80% in fact. So that's what that all means. Okay, clean that up a little bit. So when we're dealing with numbers that are this big, let's just move them all to whole numbers. We don't really care about the 0.75 here. So we're just going to move everything to a whole number. Just by description only. We're not going to do a roundup function or anything. We're just going to... And it's barking at me because it knows that these NAs are there. So we're just going to move it along here and not select those NAs from our data set. And just go along with this. Okay. Remember the green little triangle here simply means that a format is different, or calculation here is different than the one above it. So Excel is trying to be helpful and remind us of that. We can ignore that. Okay. So beautify your little sheet here. And now we've got our stuff. Now here's a beautiful thing. Copy this right here. Copy all this and paste it over there. Paste it over there. So now, because we set it up this way, because Ratajczyk showed you how to set it up this way, those formulas respond not to the red sheet or the blue sheet, but the sheet that you're in. So we just did all of our formulas. We just did everything. Okay? So that is pretty cool. Now what we need to do is calculate the absolute forecast error. Okay, remember, I'm not asking for anything else. I just want the absolute forecast error. Okay. So remember, we could do forecast minus actual, actual minus forecast, depending on your company, and ultimately it's going to come out the same because we're doing an ABS function. So actual minus, okay, the naive. Okay. So keep in mind we've got to do this for each one. So we'll just drag this across and just replace the word naive each time, 3K MA. Make sure you get the headers correct based on what you already formatted. Cumulative average. And we've got exponential. I know this is a mouthful, 0.2. It's always good to make sure your audience can understand or follow your logic. So yes, that header is kind of insane. But we're not dealing with databases and SQL statements today. We are dealing with forecasting. So we can drag this down. We did everything right. It's calculating the errors there, and it's doing the ABS of it. Great. Can't do that calculation here. Can't do it here, can't do it here, can't do it here. Let's just fill in these as well. Okay. And now we're just doing the same thing, folks. We're going to take ABS, make sure you do ABS of the sword sales minus the 3K moving average, and you got your numbers here. Now here's a little tip. You could anchor this because we're always going to use the C value. So you could anchor the column and it just moves with you. So in this example here, when I double click, note that I'm still using the C6, but now I'm over in exponential smoothing. So now I can drag down. And in fact, I can drag up as well. And now you can see I'm using the cumulative average and the red swords and the red swords. Okay. Again, because we're dealing with whole numbers here, let's just go ahead and make these kind of whole numbers, just to be nice and cute, and such. Because at this point, when we're dealing with hundreds of products, hundreds of sales, as we are with the black swords and other swords in general, we don't really care about a fraction. Okay, we don't really care about a fraction of a product here. So we're just going to use the round function as a data visual. So you're, again, not typing in the round function. You're just moving those zeros and getting rid of them, just so we can look at the data. Nothing more. Just look at the data. Okay, so here's the other beautiful thing, as you guessed it. You can now copy this. Let's just data ink this up a little bit, make it look cute, nice and structured. In class, I saw some of you doing this work, and it looked real messy. It was hard to follow. So just take the time and note that if you're careful, you can set this up one time and be done. A couple of pastes, and there we go. Always double check your work, make sure your paste was correct. For example, I see this surge here. What's the surge all about? Make sure you have the right numbers. Yes, absolutely, we do have the right numbers. There. Ooh, we got a couple of things we missed over here, so we'll just clean that up too. Make it solid numbers for ourselves, just so we can look at it a little easier. I feel like I'm Bob Ross, the painter, at the moment. And just keep going with that process. Just make it look nice and cute. Put some nice makeup on it, so to speak. Okay, so remember the price list is useless. We can hide that as it's a distraction to you. Always save your work. Don't forget to save your work, because when we start building these big models in class, you're going to want to save your work. You're not going to want to rely on Excel automatically saving every 10 to 15 minutes. Believe me, you're not going to want to rely on that. Okay, so if I did everything correct here, you now have the forecast errors. So now what you could do is you could do the average. So what is the mean ABS FE? Mean forecast error. So we can go ahead. Remember a tip here, you can go to view, freeze panes, and now you can see what your headers are without having to scroll back up. So we do the average here. Now this is where it's dangerous, okay? Do not take the average of data that you don't have. So if you simply drag this across, which you can, you just have to note that you have to go up and be careful that you didn't put zeros here. Okay, so here's what I mean. My references included some of the NAs, and my averages become 26.95. If I had zeros here, if I put zeros here, look at my average. It went down to 24. That's because Excel responds to numbers and not to text in a calculation. So be very careful with that when you set up your references if you're referencing zeros, because especially with the blue swords, I didn't start selling any blue swords. Look at this. I didn't start selling them until August of 2000. So it's not fair to use the average of 0 here. Okay? So be very careful with that, especially when you use this stuff. We'll talk about that in a moment. But let's wrap this up here. Looks good. Make that whole numbers again. Okay. And again, we can do the same thing. Just copy this formula. Isn't that beautiful, the way that we set this up? Keep in mind that you did it in 28, so you want to do it again over here in 28, and again over here in 28. And voila. Now, this is what I was talking about, the blue swords. Because I didn't sell any, it's not fair to use the average for these values. Because look what happens here. It says 22, but the moment I get rid of using those zeros, which aren't real sales, I've got 30. Okay, so just drag that across, copy it across, and you're back in business here. Okay, so those are the better numbers for the blue swords. Black swords, do we have any issues with that? I do not believe we do. Again, oh, we do. Actually, we don't. So don't be misguided by the zeros. Let's just double check and make sure I wasn't too gung-ho on that. Correct, yep. Sometimes you have zeros over here, so you have to really look at these as your zero columns. Because look, the forecast over here was right. 153, 153. So I want that in my calculation for errors. Okay? So hit save, and now you can generally answer the questions. Here's what I like to do. For each one, okay, so now what I like to do is all of these errors that we got here, let me show you this. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go over here and paste. But if I just paste, it's going to line up like this. I don't want that. I want it to go down. So we're going to do paste special values, okay, and then we're going to hit transpose, which pivots the data down, and now I've got this information. Okay. Okay. So now what I can do is I can go and get my red sword, my forecast error for the naive, okay, my forecast error for the moving average, my forecast error for the cumulative, my forecast error for the exponential smoothing. Okay. Okay. I can do the same here for the blue. Okay, so I'll pause the video and do that for you. Okay, so we have our calculations here. And the thing to note is, look at this. We have some ties. Technically, they're not ties, but if we rounded the numbers, they would be. So let's just not round them for a moment. And look at our results here. This is actually the winner. There. This one's actually the oops. This one's actually the winner here. And this one's the winner here. Okay. So for red swords, according to this data, the 3K is the best one. Blue swords, the 3K is the best one there. And for black swords, it's 5.19 with the cumulative average. So think about those for a moment. Why is cumulative average so good for the black sword? But also note how close a couple of the others are, right? Look at how close. Every time this is a winner, the second place one is exponential smoothing. Same thing here. This one here, exponential smoothing of a 0.2 is the second place winner. Okay, so, and this isn't too far off either. We're talking about 30% of a unit. So ultimately, in this case, I would say that if you're a company and this was your data set, for simplicity, you might consider using just the 3K moving average for all of the products because the error isn't too much different if we were talking in terms of a whole unit. Again, if we were to boil this back, you'd see that there, that it's really not that much difference. Now that's in this context. Now imagine we had thousands of products and thousands of sales. That might be different. It might be the difference between $10,000 in profit or purchases of those swords. Remember, my swords, if you were in class, it cost me $2 to buy any one of these 3 swords. I sold them for $10 each, plus another $6 in profiting from shipping. So I made quite a bit of money on each sword and sold hundreds of them a month. So